So one of the things that I want to call out first of all is some new additions to Azure Migrate. Now, if you have watched me or seen me do any talks over the last 3 or 4 years, you'll know that Azure Migrate is probably my favorite service across the Azure board. It's one of the ones that I deep dived into, and I spent a lot of time learning and with the product team when I was at Microsoft talking about. So I'm excited to see where they're going with these new features. So we've got 3 new announcements happening that they released at Build. So we've got agentless discovery and grouping of dependent Hyper-V virtual machines and physical servers to ensure required components are identified and included during a move to Azure. And that feature is generally available. And I believe that feature has been out for a while, but it's been in public preview or private preview, and this is it finally going GA. So agentless means that there's less onus on you having to install an agent on every virtual machine that you want to discover and want to migrate with Azure Migrate. That's long been an issue with a lot of customers because they didn't want to go through the hassle of having to install an agent on hundreds or thousands of machines, or they couldn't get the approval to install an agent on the machine. So having that agentless discoverness for Hyper-V is going to hopefully be an unblocker for a lot of customers. We've also seen the team improve around the Azure SQL assessment. So you get that better experience, and assessments now include recommendations for SQL Server on Azure virtual machines and support for Hyper-V VMs and physical stacks, along with an existing assessment for your Azure SQL managed instance and Azure SQL database. And this is a preview feature that the team are introducing. So they're looking at how you can move your SQL databases from on-prem, from where you currently have them, and then putting them into Azure and the various different options that you have inside the Azure world for SQL. Now, the third bit of news that they've released is this pause and resume of the migration functionality. Now, this is a preview feature, but it's quite interesting to see because there has been a lot of issues with customers trying to migrate to Azure, and the length of time that takes, and then the scoping that they have to enforce on it, whether they maybe have to put QoS, so quality of service, on their internet pipes so that a migration doesn't steal all of their bandwidth when they're migrating. So being able to pause and resume your migration is going to help a lot of customers, hopefully help with that migration feature. Now it's in preview, so it'll be interesting to see, and we do want to have a test of this. So I'll need to set up my little mini lab to do some Azure Migrate testing, but it's exciting to see that they're thinking about how people want to use this technology and introducing that as well. So yeah, let's see what happens there. Now, another bit of news that I think has almost gone under the radar a little bit is this single node Azure Stack HCI announcement. So you can now use a single node with your Azure Stack HCI. Now, this is a feature I believe has really been around since the start of the year, but in kind of preview and not supported, but it's now been available and you can now do this. So you can have that smaller footprint of Azure Stack HCI solutions in your environment, maybe where you've had physical space constraints and you needed that smaller hardware footprint. And yeah, you can now use this. Now, there obviously is issues around having a single node in anything that you do. There's no redundancy potentially. There's issues where that, yeah, it isn't great for production. So that's something to bear in mind. But this single node capability gives you a bit more flexibility for your smaller offices if you wanted to move to Azure Stack HCI and take care of some of the functionality that we're seeing with that Azure Stack HCI configuration. But you can also extend it, so you can start with a single node and you can add up to 16 nodes if needed with this configuration. So again, something exciting that's coming along in the Azure Stack HCI world. So definitely something to have a look at if you're looking at it, and maybe that's been a blocker for you installing Azure Stack HCI in your environments before. Now, we've also got new virtual machine capabilities. So in the Azure Compute series, we've seen the EBS-v5 VM series expanded to 13 more regions. Now, this EV5 Azure Virtual Machine family offers up to 1,200,000 IOPS and 400,000 megabits per second of remote disk storage throughput. And this also can include up to 512 gigabytes of RAM and local SSD storage up to 2.4 gigabytes. So that's a phenomenal amount of compute that you could have with this virtual machine. So it's now available in South Africa, France Central Italy, Korea Central, Germany West Central, UK West, South India, Canada East, Australia Central, Japan West, Switzerland North, Norway East, and UAE North. And no, I didn't memorize that. I did read that out. So yeah, another capability there about extending that VM compute into different regions and having that available for you. Now, looking towards Azure Cost Management, we've seen some new capabilities around creating and managing your Azure costs through scheduled emails. So using the Scheduled Actions API, you can create emails from Azure Cost Analysis in the portal and allows you to schedule those emails and have them triggering maybe one-time emails to support advanced scenarios. So again, keeping an eye on your Azure Cost Management and keeping an eye on what's happening in your environment and potentially not having to look at the portal all the time. So again, scheduling those emails when you want them to trigger, when you need them to be able to send out that email and alert people to have a look at what's happening with your costs. So lots of exciting features there. And I think some of these features are small in terms of, the changes that they make. They may not be the big flashy bells and whistles features, but some of these features are very important to where the customers are and where you potentially are on your journey. So it's great to see the teams rolling them out and having them available for us to use. Now, if you look to Azure Backup, another stable within the Azure services, something that I'm sure a lot of people maybe even started with in terms of looking towards Azure and implementing it and offloading some of their backups from on-prem into the cloud. We now have backup for write accelerator enabled disks for Azure Backup. So let me read out what this means to you, because I think write accelerator enabled disks is something not a lot of people may know about. So these disks are widely used by Azure customers with the M series virtual machines to improve their I/O latency of writes against Azure Premium storage. So up until now, this was a preview feature that you could back them up, but now it's generally available. So those disks, those write accelerator disks that you're using for those I/O intensive workloads can now be backed up, fully supported with Azure Backup as well. So it's good to see that enabled and having a look at. Again, I'm sure there's customers out here that use this quite heavily and are happy to see this announcement in general availability. And I'm sure there's also a ton of you that have never heard of Write Accelerator enabled disks. So hopefully this has been a good announcement for everybody involved.